Donald Trump fired his controversial campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, with prominent strategist Paul Manafort taking over. The departure was abrupt and is the campaign's most significant staff change to date. Trump's presidential campaign has been struggling in recent days, and now it appears an overhaul is in the works just ahead of the general election. Joining us now to talk about this shakeup is political author and HuffPost contributor Rich Rubino. Rich, thanks for joining us. Do we know why Corey Lewandowski was let go?
Well, I mean, the rumor is that it was his family that really wanted to let him go, but from a purely campaign tactical standpoint, it was probably the right decision in terms of, he kind of brought him to the dance. It was almost a year ago to the day where Donald Trump went down that escalator and people said, oh, this is, he's just running to promote his brand. It's a branding thing. It's a publicity thing. Well, a year later, he's a Republican nominee. So, I mean, he deserves a lot of credit for getting him to that point. But part of getting him to that point was, quote unquote, letting Trump be Trump. And he was really able to galvanize a constituency, a lot of kind of angry conservatives, angry Reagan Democrats who voted in the primary, some angry independents. But now he's in the general election, and that let Trump be Trump strategy, I think, is kind of going by the wayside. At least they're going to control. Mr. Manafort is going to try to control Trump, make him sound more presidential. And I think he's going to give speeches using teleprompters, for example, which he had shunned in the past. So I think that's basically the reason why he was great getting him to the dance. But now that he's at the dance, he needs somebody to bring him to the finish line. That's, I think, what the Trump strategy is.
Do you think it had anything to do with money? Hillary Clinton has 42 million versus
40 to 1,
Trump's.
yeah.
Yeah, Trump's got 1.3 million. Could that have played a role?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, from a primary standpoint, though, I mean, Donald Trump has gotten so much free media. Part of it, the media is really complicit in it. He was on just about every single network. He would literally call in himself as opposed to having a spokesperson do it. He would call into just about every show, every conservative radio show in a state that Indiana, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, everywhere where he was. He called into all the national shows. So he was getting a lot of free media, whereas Hillary Clinton really had to work for it. But now Hillary Clinton really has a war chest, and she has staff in all the battleground states, whereas Donald Trump tends to have a very limited staff right now, although that's obviously going to increase. I think that Donald Trump, in many respects, everything was prepared for his kind of sui generis way of running in the primary, which was essentially just him being him, going out there doing his own interviews. But now in the general election, he really needs to micro-target voters. He needs a field team. He needs essentially what every other campaign does. He can't just rely on Republican National Committee workers who are not loyal to him. And I think that certainly he needs to raise money. He was self-funded in the primary, but fundraising's got to be something new for him because it's very hard for somebody who's a billionaire to go to somebody and say, I need money.
Yeah, his staff was certainly small but mighty, especially compared to Hillary Clinton's. He's definitely struggling in the polls lately. Will this abrupt firing right the ship, or do you think it kind of underscores the campaign's instability?
I think that it's true about the polls, but it's amazing though how high he actually is in the polls for somebody with literally polls showing a 70% disapproval rating. He is within 1 point in Pennsylvania, within 6 points in Florida, essentially tied in Ohio. Those are the three major showdown states, quote unquote showdown states. It's really amazing what he's been able to do. And he's been able to do this by spending almost nothing. So I think that he's now at this phase where he's essentially going to really start spending a lot of money. But, Hillary Clinton does not have this wrapped up, which I think a lot of people would say that any standard issue Democrat that was running would essentially have this wrapped up when you have somebody with a 70% disapproval rating amongst the American people. The problem is that Hillary Clinton has about a 55% disapproval rating. So neither of the major candidates are very well liked right now. And there's certainly an aperture for someone like Libertarian Gary Johnson to do a lot better than expected.
Yeah, what do you expect will come out of that?
I think that he potentially could get to the 15%. And if he gets to that 15% threshold, if he crosses that Rubicon and gets into the debates, then essentially we could have, a very different situation. It could be, remember, in 1980 when John Anderson was running, for example, as an independent, there was a time when he was actually at 25 or so percent. When Ross Perot was running, before he dropped out the first time, he was literally ahead. He was at about 35%. George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton were behind him. So there is just such an aperture the size of the Grand Canyon right now for somebody else in this race. And the question is, Gary Johnson, he's not exactly charismatic, but he does have a message of socially liberal, fiscally conservative, non-interventionist in foreign policy, which I think would strike a resonant chord with a lot of people who are kind of just sick of the major candidates. I can't tell you how many times that you hear people saying, I really don't like either of these two candidates. A lot of the Bernie supporters, for example, don't like Hillary, and then you have a lot of the people, a lot of the Christian conservatives who supported Ted Cruz don't particularly like Donald Trump. A lot of moderates are kind of afraid of Donald Trump, so there really is an opening there.
Let's talk about Ivanka Trump. She reportedly gave her dad an ultimatum and said, "It's Lewandowski or me."
Yes.
Is this unusual for family to be working so closely on campaigns?
Yes, it is. It sounds more like that sounds more something you hear from the mafia than anything else.
Right?
Yeah,
And he's been
at
compared to
least
that too.
at least it would certainly appear that way. I remember he has adult children lots of times. I mean, for example, when Bill Clinton was running, he had Chelsea who was about 12 years old, so obviously she couldn't. She didn't have that much influence. Barack Obama had two young daughters, and during when he was running for the presidency. But having adult children, having a certainly having a wife, they're all kind of working together, and it is in many respects kind of almost a family affair. But when you have a family affair, you have a lot of people who don't necessarily have political experience, which was something that Paul Manafort had. I mean, he worked for going back to 1976. He was a political whiz kid working for Gerald Ford and really working to secure Ford the nomination when then former Republican Governor Ronald Reagan was challenging him. So I think between his wife and his kids, he really needs to expand. He really needs to broaden out a little bit because you really need people who are political professionals. Even if you're running as an anti-establishment candidate, it's very hard to do that without micro-targeting the proper voters, without getting the list, without you could rely specifically on the Republican National Committee to put their workers out, but you really need people who are loyal Trump people as opposed to people who are just functionaries of the Republican Party.
Yeah, and now that Lewandowski is gone, Jared Kushner has moved in. That's Ivanka's husband. He's helping
Yes.
out with the campaign now.
Yes, it really is. It's a family. You hear this. Sometimes when someone will run for selectman or city council or even governor, you'll hear what the influence that their families have. But you very rarely hear that at the presidential level. You hear certainly about the wife having influence, but very rarely do you have should you have children with it having this much influence. I think I think that Mr. Manafort is probably really going to broaden this out, and he's going to probably try to bring in some people who are more or less kind of career Republican strategists, if you will. The problem is a lot of those strategists do not necessarily want to be tethered to Donald Trump for future elections. So we have to have somebody who at least has some loyalty, who has endorsed Donald Trump, and who's not said anything to the press in the past which has excoriated in any way Donald Trump, which might be kind of hard because there are a lot of these strategists have been on television, they've been on radio, and Donald Trump certainly was not their first choice in the primary.
And now with the convention coming up, we're hearing a lot of the corporate sponsors are stepping away and they don't want to be involved in it.
Yeah, it's fascinating between the corporate sponsors and you look at the last Republican nominee. You have George W. Bush wants no part of this, has not endorsed Donald Trump. George H.W. Bush has not endorsed Donald Trump. Bob Dole has kind of reluctantly endorsed Donald Trump. John McCain has reluctantly endorsed him but won't be at the convention. Mitt Romney has not endorsed him and certainly will not be at the convention. This is really almost the last time I think you can have any sort of scenario like this is probably back in 1896 when the Democrats nominated William Jennings Bryan, who supported who supported getting rid of the gold standard, who was for more government services, and was really kind of who was for a federal income tax. It was really kind of antithetical to what the Democratic Party had been. And as a result, Grover Cleveland, the incumbent president, and a lot of the Democrats who supported him actually abandoned the party. They left the ship, and the refugees went over to the National Democratic Party and supported John M. Palmer, who got about 1% of the vote, although he did get the New York Times endorsement that year. That's really the last time I can think where you had a party that didn't even pretend to be united. I mean, can you imagine in 2012, Mitt Romney gets the Republican nomination, so theoretically he's the titular head of the Republican Party. By 2016, he will not even endorse the Republican nominee. I mean, that is really an interesting and really very rare phenomenon.
Yeah, way to put that in perspective. I read that one of the reasons Lewandowski was let go was because he said he wanted to leak Trump's vice president pick.
Yes.
Would that have been a smart move or a disaster?
I think it would have been a disaster in terms of it would have essentially, you would have had a 1 or 2 day story about who he picked, and then it would have been gone. Now, if he chooses it at the convention, which he says he's going to do, there are going to be a lot more people who are going to be following that convention. The convention is really the time when a lot of people focus on politics specifically. And I think that if he did this prematurely, even if it was a safe pick, like people always talk about Senator Bob Corker, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, someone like that. It's a sexy story for a day or two, but essentially after that, it's gone. And then then all the speculation is going to be, well, who's Hillary going to pick? I think he wants the speculation till the very last second when he can essentially choose somebody. And I mean, there's so much media coverage because people have no idea. Will he choose somebody from the establishment, or will he choose somebody that nobody's ever heard of because he's such an unconventional candidate?
Yeah, lots of people want to know. He's got lots of issues going on. We
Oh,
can
yes.
certainly blame the campaign manager for all these issues, but from the message to the image to the disunity within the party. But Trump's problems go well beyond the campaign manager. At the very least, some are hopeful this latest move will allow for a dramatic change in the course. Rich Rubino, great to have you on with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.